Trust is the foundation we build our lives upon. But what happens when that foundation crumbles not once, but twice? What remains when everything you believed turns to dust? Olivia Bennet stared at the multiple passports in her trembling hands, all with her new husband's face but different names. In 18 months, she had gone from being a devoted wife and mother to a woman standing at the edge of a moral precipice, married to a man whose wealth came with secrets dark enough to threaten everything she held dear. Have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they weren't who they claimed to be? Have you felt that gut-wrenching moment when reality shifts and you realize your judgment, your very instincts, failed you in the most fundamental way? This is the story of how one woman's journey from heartbreaking betrayal to apparent salvation became something far more complex. How Olivia transformed from an abandoned wife, struggling to feed her children, to the reluctant spouse of a billionaire whose empire was built on foundations she never could have imagined, and the impossible choice that would determine not just her future, but her very soul. 7 years before Olivia found those passports, her life resembled a modern American dream. At 32, Olivia Bennet had built a life that many would envy, a life constructed on what she believed were unshakable promises and shared dreams. Her Portland neighborhood featured tree-lined streets where children rode bicycles under the watchful eyes of neighbors who knew each other by name. The Bennet family home stood as a testament to thoughtful renovation, a 1920s craftsman with rich wood trim, stained glass accents, and a wraparound porch where Olivia and Michael would sit most evenings, watching the sunset while discussing their day. Michael Bennet had been Olivia's college sweetheart, the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries without prompting and brought home flowers just because. As a marketing executive for a national outdoor apparel company, he earned enough that they lived comfortably if not extravagantly. What Olivia valued most was his steady presence, the way he'd take over bedtime stories without complaint when she faced design deadlines, his patience teaching their daughters to swim, and the gentle way he'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was stressed. "My anchor," she called him, never imagining that anchors could be lifted. Their daughters formed the center of their universe. 7-year-old Abigail, with her father's analytical mind and serious expressions, already showed remarkable talent with numbers and logic puzzles. She collected rocks and labeled them meticulously, dreaming of becoming a dinosaur scientist. 5-year-old Madison possessed an artistic temperament that matched her mother's, filling sketchbooks with surprisingly detailed drawings and insisting on selecting her own outfits, however mismatched. 3-year-old Zoe, with bouncing curls and endless energy, had mastered the art of wrapping everyone, especially her father, around her tiny finger with a single dimpled smile. The girls shared a special bond despite their different personalities, often creating elaborate imaginary worlds together that lasted for days. Working from her home studio, Olivia had built a modest but growing graphic design business that allowed her the flexibility to attend school events and be present for her daughters while still exercising her creative talents. Local businesses sought her minimalist, elegant style for their branding, and she'd recently landed a contract with a regional magazine that promised both creative fulfillment and financial stability. She scheduled work around her daughter's needs, designing logos during preschool hours, finalizing layouts during nap times, and often working late into the night after bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. The balancing act exhausted her sometimes, but she found deep satisfaction in both her roles. The shifts in Michael began so subtly that Olivia later struggled to pinpoint when they started. The first noticeable change came in February, when he forgot Valentine's Day entirely, something inconceivable for the man who had once orchestrated a surprise renewal of their vows on their 5th anniversary. His phone began demanding more attention than his family, and dinner conversations became one-sided as Olivia carried the weight of engagement alone. When Madison won her first art contest, Michael missed the ceremony despite promising to attend. Something came up at work, he explained without elaboration, missing the disappointment that shadowed his daughter's face. When she scanned the audience for him, therapists have identified a phenomenon they call clueless alien syndrome, when a formerly devoted partner undergoes a personality transformation so complete it seems as though they've been replaced by an imposter. Unlike gradual relationship deterioration, this syndrome manifests as a sudden emotional severing, leaving the abandoned partner bewildered by the speed and totality of the change. Dr. Rebecca Lang, who specializes in relationship trauma, explains that this experience creates a unique form of psychological injury. The abandoned partner questions not only their relationship, but their entire reality. They wonder how they could have been so wrong about someone they thought they knew completely, triggering a crisis of confidence that extends far beyond the relationship itself. If you've ever felt someone you love become a stranger before your eyes, that disorienting moment when familiar eyes look back at you with unfamiliar coldness, hit the like button and subscribe to Milton Stories. In this journey through Olivia's experience, you'll discover that sometimes the most profound betrayals come from those closest to our hearts, and that survival often requires strength we never knew we possessed. The last ordinary day of Olivia's married life was unremarkable in every way. She'd prepared Michael's favorite pasta dish, the girls had been relatively well behaved at dinner, and they'd watched a family movie together before bedtime. The next morning, Michael kissed her goodbye as usual before leaving for work. His "see you tonight" carried no hint of finality, no suggestion that these familiar words were the last she would hear spoken with any warmth. When Michael returned that evening, his expression was blank, his movements mechanical. While the girls played upstairs, he stood in their kitchen, the room where they'd danced while washing dishes countless times, and without preamble said, "I can't pretend to be happy anymore. I've tried, but this isn't the life I want." His voice was eerily calm, as though discussing a minor schedule change, rather than demolishing their family. Olivia asked questions. Was there someone else? Had she done something wrong? Could they try counseling? His responses were vague, dismissive. "It's not about you," he said. Though, of course, the abandonment of a mother and 3 young daughters was very much about them. Within 40 minutes of this conversation, Michael had packed 2 suitcases and walked out the front door. No proper goodbye to his daughters, no real explanation, just the echo of the door closing behind him. In the days that followed, Olivia moved through shock into panicked practicality. Their checking account contained just enough to cover 2 weeks of expenses. Her graphic design clients would provide some income, but nowhere near enough to maintain mortgage payments on their home. Michael had always handled their finances, an arrangement that had seemed sensible when he was the primary earner, but now revealed itself as a critical vulnerability. Text messages went unanswered. Calls to his office reached a receptionist who awkwardly explained he had taken an indefinite leave of absence. His parents, when contacted, were equally confused and distressed, promising to reach out if they heard from him. The discovery about their finances came 3 weeks after Michael's departure. Olivia finally gained access to their joint investment accounts after multiple calls to financial institutions, only to find them emptied. College funds established for the girls, gone. Their emergency savings transferred out. Even the account designated for home repairs showed a 0 balance. Each phone call, each login attempt, each bank statement revealed a new dimension to Michael's betrayal. The methodical nature of the withdrawals suggested weeks or months of planning. While Olivia had been planning their summer vacation and researching after-school programs, Michael had been systematically dismantling their financial foundation. The emotional wreckage affected each family member differently. Abigail, old enough to grasp the concept of abandonment, if not its reasons, withdrew into silent stoicism. her bedroom becoming a fortress she rarely left voluntarily. Madison developed separation anxiety, clinging to Olivia even during brief bathroom visits. Zoe regressed in potty training and began thumb-sucking again, behaviors she'd outgrown a year earlier. Olivia herself cycled between numbness and overwhelming panic, often waiting until after bedtime to release the tears she couldn't let her daughters see. Sleep became elusive, replaced by endless mental calculations of how to stretch dwindling resources, and unanswerable questions about what signs she might have missed. The moment that crystallized Olivia's new reality occurred 6 weeks after Michael left. Standing in the kitchen, she opened mail she'd been avoiding, a past-due mortgage notice with threatening red lettering. As she calculated whether selling her computer equipment might cover the payment, Madison tugged at her shirt. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home? I made him a new picture." She held up a crayon drawing of their family. Michael's figure drawn disproportionately large, a smiling sun overhead. Olivia knelt to her daughter's eye level, searching for words that wouldn't devastate yet wouldn't foster false hope. The simultaneous pressure of financial catastrophe and her child's innocent question created a moment of clarity. She was entirely on her own in salvaging what remained of their lives. Have you ever experienced that moment, when life fractures into before and after? When everything familiar dissolves, leaving you in territory so new you don't even have a map. We've all faced versions of abandonment, perhaps not as dramatic as Olivia's, but just as disorienting. That instant when you realize the person you trusted most has left you vulnerable, when promises prove hollow, when the future you planned vanishes in an instant. That moment forces us to discover reservoirs of strength we never knew we possessed. Olivia's phone screen illuminated the darkened bedroom, displaying 17 unanswered calls to Michael over the past week. Her thumb hovered over his contact information, considering one more attempt. Instead, she deleted his number entirely, the blue glow reflecting the tears on her face as she made her first decision as a truly single mother, to stop waiting for rescue from the man who had caused the damage. For 2 months after Michael's departure, Olivia constructed a new normal from the fragments he'd left behind. She sold their second car and most of her jewelry. She moved all 3 girls into one bedroom so she could rent out the master suite to a doctoral student who thankfully didn't mind children. The graphic design business expanded as she accepted every project offered, regardless of creative satisfaction. Her days began at 5 a.m. and ended well past midnight, a relentless cycle of school drop-offs, client meetings, meal preparation, bedtime routines, and design work during stolen hours. The physical exhaustion actually helped. It left little energy for dwelling on questions that had no answers. Her daughters asked about their father less frequently as weeks passed, which brought both relief and a peculiar sadness that they could adapt so quickly to his absence. The text message from Michael arrived on a Tuesday evening as Olivia helped Madison with her homework. "I want to see the kids this weekend. Miss them. Let me know what works." No acknowledgement of his lengthy absence, no questions about their welfare, no mention of financial support. The presumption in those brief sentences that he could disappear for months, then casually request visitation on his terms, triggered a rage Olivia hadn't allowed herself to feel amid survival concerns. Her response was direct. "Before any visits happen, we need to discuss child support and the money you took." His reply came hours later. "There's no money. Business investments failed, nearly bankrupt, trying to get back on my feet. Still want to see my daughters." Olivia might have believed the bankruptcy claim had Abigail not discovered the photos. During a rare quiet moment when Olivia allowed her oldest to play educational games on her tablet, Abigail had impulsively checked her father's social media accounts. "Mommy, why is Daddy at the beach if he can't send us money?" she asked, turning the screen to show recent uploads. Michael, noticeably tanned, lounged in a hammock strung between palm trees at a luxury resort in the Maldives. The geotag and timestamp confirmed it had been posted just days earlier. Additional photos showed elaborate seafood platters, premium cocktails, and breathtaking villa accommodations positioned over crystal-clear water. Olivia's confusion about Michael's behavior shifted suddenly into absolute clarity. This wasn't a breakdown or midlife crisis. This was calculated cruelty. The annual Mother's Day gathering at her parents' home should have provided respite from Olivia's mounting stress. Instead, her sister Rebecca's behavior immediately struck her as odd. Rebecca, usually attentive to her nieces, seemed distracted and nervous, repeatedly checking her phone and leaving the room for hushed conversations. When their mother suggested a family photo, Rebecca objected with unusual vehemence. During dinner, Rebecca barely made eye contact with Olivia, focusing intently on her plate, while family conversation awkwardly navigated around the elephant in the room: Michael's abandonment and the financial strain it had created for Olivia and the girls. The revelation came from 3-year-old Zoe, who possessed that devastating innocence that bypasses adult social filters. As Rebecca declined dessert and stood to leave early, Zoe tugged at her aunt's skirt and asked, "Can we go to the park with you and Daddy again? I like the ice cream we got." The room fell silent. Rebecca's face drained of color as every adult processed the implication. "You saw Daddy at the park?" Olivia asked her youngest with forced lightness. Zoe nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy and Aunt Becca were hugging and kissing like on TV. Then we got chocolate ice cream and fed ducks." The weight of this statement hung in the air for several excruciating seconds before Olivia's mother hastily suggested the girls join their grandfather in the backyard. In the suffocating privacy of her parents' bedroom, Olivia confronted her sister. Rebecca's initial denials collapsed quickly under the weight of evidence from Zoe's innocent disclosure. "It wasn't planned," Rebecca insisted, as if that somehow diminished the betrayal. "It just happened." The affair, Rebecca admitted, had begun 6 months before Michael left. Around the time Rebecca had ended her own engagement for reasons she'd never fully explained, what had started as innocent lunches — he needed someone to talk to about his unhappiness — evolved into a relationship conducted in careful secrecy. The most devastating admission emerged when Olivia demanded to know about the missing money. Rebecca's eyes dropped to the floor as she confessed to helping Michael open accounts in his name only, advising him on asset transfers, and connecting him with her friend who worked at an offshore banking institution. "He felt trapped," Rebecca explained, her voice taking on a defensive edge that suggested she viewed herself as a rescuer rather than an accomplice. "He needed someone who understood him, who could help him start fresh." The justification revealed a stunning lack of concern for the 3 children whose financial security had been sacrificed for this fresh start. When Olivia asked why her own sister would participate in destroying her family's stability, Rebecca's response exposed the depth of her self-absorption. "You've always had everything come easily to you. The perfect husband, beautiful children, creative talent. For once, I wanted something you had." The family fractured along unclear lines in the aftermath. Their parents, overwhelmed by conflict between their daughters, attempted neutrality, a position that felt like another betrayal to Olivia. Extended family members grew uncomfortable around the rawness of Olivia's situation and gradually reduced contact. Longtime friends, unsure how to navigate the messy emotional terrain, began declining invitations. The isolation intensified Olivia's vulnerability precisely when she most needed support, creating a void around her small family that emphasized how quickly community can evaporate when circumstances become complicated. Comment below if you've ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely. What hurts more, the initial deception or the moment you realize how deliberately they planned their betrayal? Share your story. And remember to subscribe to Milton Stories for more real-life accounts that remind us we're never alone in our experiences of human frailty and resilience. 6 months into single parenthood, Olivia's life bore no resemblance to her previous existence. The family home had been sold in a rushed transaction that barely covered the mortgage, relocating them to a two-bedroom apartment where Olivia slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. Her graphic design business continued, but she had supplemented it with 2 additional jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop near the girls' school and weekend catering work that paid cash. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford. Most nights, she worked on design projects until 2 a.m., caught 4 hours of restless sleep, then rose at 6 a.m. to prepare the girls for school before her coffee shop shift. The physical toll was evident in her appearance: weight loss, dark circles beneath her eyes, and hands perpetually reddened from dish soap and hot water. The legal battle for child support proved as emotionally draining as it was financially futile. Michael had expertly hidden assets, making him appear far less wealthy on paper than in reality. Their court-appointed mediator seemed indifferent to Olivia's evidence of Michael's luxury travel. "Social media posts aren't financial documentation," he explained with bureaucratic detachment. Michael's lawyer, far more expensive than Olivia could afford, presented bank statements showing minimal income and substantial debt, a paper fiction that nevertheless carried legal weight. The judge ordered child support payments so modest they wouldn't cover even a quarter of the children's expenses. Adding insult to injury, Michael consistently paid late, forcing Olivia to decide between pursuing enforcement through costly legal channels or simply absorbing the shortfall herself. The emotional resilience Olivia had relied upon began showing cracks as months passed. While maintaining a brave face for her daughters, she found herself crying during her brief showers, the only private moments in her day. Abigail had started therapy for anxiety, an expense Olivia couldn't really afford but prioritized above all else. Madison developed stomach aches before school, likely a physical manifestation of emotional stress. Only Zoe seemed to adapt fully to their new circumstances, too young to fully comprehend the magnitude of change. Olivia interrogated herself constantly. Had she missed warning signs? Could she have protected the girls better? Was there something fundamentally unlovable about her that had driven Michael away? These questions circled her mind during long commutes and late nights, unanswerable yet persistent. The Evergreen Foundation's annual charity gala represented one of the highest-paying catering opportunities of the season. Held at the city's most exclusive hotel, the event gathered Portland's wealthiest philanthropists for an evening of performative generosity. Olivia and her fellow servers wore mandatory black and white uniforms and received strict instructions: remain invisible except when serving, smile constantly, and address guests as sir or ma'am, regardless of age. The pay for one evening equaled 3 days at the coffee shop, making the indignities worthwhile. Olivia had been assigned to wine service, circulating with trays of champagne and keeping glasses filled throughout dinner. The physical demands of standing for hours while balancing heavy trays aggravated her chronic back pain, but she maintained perfect posture and a practiced smile. The accident occurred during the main course. Navigating between tightly arranged tables with a bottle of red wine, Olivia was bumped by a gesticulating guest mid-anecdote. The bottle tilted, sending a stream of deep burgundy liquid directly onto a man's light gray suit jacket. Horror froze Olivia as she watched the stain spread across what was clearly extraordinarily expensive fabric. Her mind calculated the potential cost. Replacement of a guest's designer clothing would surely result in her termination, the loss of her final paycheck, and possibly even demands for restitution she couldn't possibly afford. "I'm so incredibly sorry," she stammered, frantically dabbing at the spreading stain with her serving napkin, likely making it worse. "It's just fabric," the man said, his voice carrying unexpected warmth and amusement rather than anger. "Though I admit, this suit cost more than my first car." When Olivia finally looked up from the stain, she met eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners with genuine humor. "Alexander Thorne," he introduced himself, extending his hand as though they were equals at a business meeting rather than server and guest in the aftermath of a catastrophe. Do you believe some accidents are actually cosmic interventions? Are certain encounters, even those beginning with apparent misfortune, somehow arranged by fate? Looking back at the pivotal moments that changed your life's direction, how many began with what seemed like bad luck or a mistake? The line between disaster and destiny is often revealed only in retrospect. Alexander requested Olivia's number the night of the gala, ostensibly to arrange payment for dry cleaning his ruined suit. When she hesitantly provided it, she expected nothing to come of the interaction. Men like Alexander Thorne, with his tailored clothes and easy confidence, didn't pursue single mothers working multiple jobs. Yet the next morning, instead of a dry cleaning receipt, her phone displayed an invitation to dinner. His message acknowledged potential hesitation. "I understand if you're not interested or available. No pressure at all." Something in that acknowledgement of her agency, so rare in her recent experiences, prompted Olivia to respond honestly about her complicated life circumstances rather than simply declining. She explained her 3 children, ongoing divorce, and chaotic schedule. Alexander countered with an offer of coffee instead of dinner. Less pressure, easier to schedule, and I make excellent conversation in 30-minute increments. After 3 weeks of gentle persistence, Olivia finally agreed. During their coffee date, Alexander described himself as an international consultant who helped companies optimize global operations. The deliberate vagueness of this description wasn't lost on Olivia, but his reluctance to boast seemed refreshing compared to Michael's constant status-seeking. Alexander mentioned travel to Tokyo, Singapore, and Zurich in recent months, but focused questions on Olivia's design work instead, showing genuine interest in her creative process. When she apologized for checking her phone repeatedly, a habit developed from anxiety about childcare arrangements, he responded with understanding rather than annoyance. "Your priorities are exactly where they should be," he said, "with your daughters." Alexander's apartment, which Olivia visited after several weeks of dates, surprised her with its modesty. Located in a pleasant but unremarkable neighborhood, the 2-bedroom space featured practical furniture and minimal decor. No original artwork adorned the walls. No expensive sound system dominated the living room. His kitchen contained basic equipment and a surprisingly well-used cookbook collection. When Olivia commented on the simplicity, Alexander explained, "I'm away too often to justify more. Besides, I've found that accumulating things rarely adds meaningful value to life." The absence of ostentation, particularly from someone who wore custom suits, intrigued rather than concerned her. His lifestyle suggested comfortable financial stability without excess, exactly what she hoped to rebuild for her own family. The first meeting between Alexander and Olivia's daughters had been carefully planned, yet nearly derailed by Abigail's protective skepticism. Alexander arrived bearing thoughtfully selected gifts: a beginner's geology kit for Abigail, art supplies for Madison, and a stuffed elephant for Zoe that matched one Olivia had mentioned the child lost during their move. Rather than immediately attempting to win their affection, Alexander gave the girls space, speaking to them directly but without pressure. His breakthrough with Abigail came when he noticed her struggling with a math homework problem and offered gentle guidance without taking over. For Madison, it was his genuine admiration of her artwork, complete with specific observations about her color choices. With Zoe, he simply sat on the floor and allowed her to direct their play, following her elaborate storylines without adult condescension. By the visit's end, Madison asked when Mr. Alex would return, and even Abigail seemed cautiously approving. The contrast between Alexander's consistent attention and Michael's abandonment created an emotional dilemma for Olivia. Michael had gradually withdrawn his interest in her thoughts, dreams, and challenges long before his physical departure. Alexander, conversely, remembered details from their conversations, inquired about her design projects, and actively pursued deeper understanding of her perspective. When her youngest daughter developed a fever, Alexandra arrived uninvited with prepared meals and offered to watch the other girls, so Olivia could focus on the sick child. Where Michael had made her feel increasingly invisible, Alexander seemed to see her more clearly with each interaction. "He notices me," she confided to her therapist during a session, "not just as a mother or a caretaker, but as a person with my own needs and dreams." Emotional starvation had left Olivia vulnerable in ways she recognized but couldn't fully guard against. The isolation following her family's fracturing intensified her longing for connection. After years of gradually diminishing intimacy with Michael, followed by brutal rejection, Alexander's focused attention felt like rainfall on parched earth. Her therapist expressed concern about the relationship's rapid progression, suggesting Olivia might need more time to process her trauma before committing to someone new. Olivia acknowledged the wisdom in this advice, while simultaneously dismissing it. "I've spent months reconstructing myself from the ground up," she explained. "I know myself better now than ever before. I trust my judgment." Behind this assertion lay a deeper fear she couldn't articulate, that this opportunity for happiness might evaporate, if not grasped immediately. The proposal came 4 months after their first meeting. Alexander had arranged a picnic in the same park where they'd had their third date. As the girls explored a nearby playground under the watchful eye of a teenage neighbor hired to assist, Alexander presented Olivia with a simple but elegant ring. "I know this is fast," he acknowledged, "and I know your trust has been deeply damaged. But I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking for the chance to prove myself trustworthy every day, to you and to your daughters." He had already spoken privately with Abigail, assuring her he wasn't trying to replace her father, but hoped to become a consistent, supportive presence in their lives. The 7-year-old's cautious approval had meant more to Olivia than she could express. The wedding took place at a small botanical garden with only a dozen guests in attendance. Olivia's parents declined the invitation, still uncomfortable with her hasty decision and ongoing conflict with Rebecca. Former friends who had distanced themselves during Olivia's struggles seemed suddenly interested in reconnecting now that her circumstances had improved, an observation that led Olivia to limit invitations to only those who had remained loyal during her darkest time. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with all 3 girls participating as flower girls, their varying levels of coordination creating a charmingly imperfect procession. Alexander's vows included promises not just to Olivia, but to each daughter by name, a gesture that brought tears to the eyes of even the venue's coordinator, who had seen everything. The platinum band on Olivia's finger caught the afternoon sunlight as the car approached massive iron gates, sending prism-like reflections dancing across the leather interior. Alexander squeezed her hand gently, watching her expression as the gates swung open to reveal their destination. "Welcome home," he said softly. The winding driveway stretched nearly half a mile, cutting through manicured grounds that seemed to extend endlessly in all directions. As the car created a small hill, the house, or rather the estate, came into view. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The structure before them wasn't simply a home, but a monument to wealth. A sprawling Pacific Northwest mansion combining modern glass expanses with traditional stone elements. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sun across 3 visible wings, while fountains punctuated formal gardens that would have impressed European royalty. A staff member in uniform waited at attention near the entrance, while another directed their driver toward a separate garage complex large enough to house a dozen vehicles. "Alexander," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible, "what is this place?" "This is just where we'll live for now," he replied, with disarming casualness. "There are others." Security measures became immediately apparent as they approached. Cameras mounted at strategic intervals, personnel positioned discreetly around the property, reinforced barriers disguised as decorative elements. The front door required both a key card and biometric scan. Inside, the scale became even more impressive. Soaring ceilings, museum welding artwork, furnishings that Olivia recognized from design magazines featuring homes of the ultra-wealthy. A household manager greeted them by name, accompanied by what she described as a small portion of the household staff. 8 impeccably dressed individuals responsible for different aspects of the estate's functioning. Over the following weeks, additional dimensions of Alexander's wealth revealed themselves in cascading revelations. A casual mention of attending a meeting in Tokyo the next day led to Olivia discovering his private jet, a custom-fitted Gulfstream that waited permanently staffed at a private airfield. References to checking on renovations introduced the existence of properties in Lake Como, Manhattan, and a private Caribbean island. The appearance of a renowned chef, formerly employed by heads of state, who had been hired specifically because Alexander mentioned Olivia enjoyed Mediterranean cuisine. Her closet, which she had assumed was generously sized, turned out to be merely the anteroom to a boutique-like space, filled with designer clothing in her size, all pre-selected based on preferences Alexander had noted during their courtship. When confronted about the magnitude of his deception, Alexander's explanation seemed rehearsed, yet delivered with apparent sincerity. "Wealth distorts everything it touches," he said, sitting beside her on a terrace overlooking the Pacific. "I've watched people transform when they discover my financial status. Friends, romantic partners, business associates. Their behavior changes, their expectations shift, and suddenly I'm no longer a person but a resource to be leveraged. I needed to know you wanted me, not what I could provide." He took her hand, his expression earnest. "I've been burned before by people attracted to my bank accounts rather than myself. With you, I wanted certainty that your feelings were genuine." The transition from financial struggle to unlimited abundance created a disorienting form of whiplash for Olivia. She found herself hesitating before purchasing even small items, mentally calculating budgets out of habit before remembering such concerns were now obsolete. The household staff's constant presence made her self-conscious about tasks she'd always performed herself, making beds, preparing meals, tidying living spaces. She frequently found herself apologizing for making work for people whose job was explicitly to perform these functions. During a dinner party Alexander hosted for business associates, Olivia excused herself to the kitchen, more comfortable helping the chef plate courses than making small talk with guests whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of several nations. "You're the lady of the house now," Alexander gently reminded her. "You don't belong in the service areas." The comment, though kindly meant, highlighted the vast distance between her former life and current reality. The children adapted to luxury with the remarkable plasticity of youth. Within days, Abigail was directing staff members with polite authority about her preferences for breakfast. Madison filled her new art studio with increasingly confident creations, thriving under the tutelage of a professional artist hired for weekly lessons. Zoe treated the extensive grounds as her personal wonderland, leading her new nanny on expeditions through gardens and along nature paths. Their easy acclimation contrasted sharply with Olivia's continued sense of displacement. "Sometimes I wake up in our bedroom and feel like I'm living someone else's life," she confided to her journal. "The contrast between fighting for grocery money and suddenly having household staff is so extreme that I struggle to reconcile these realities as parts of the same lifetime." Despite Alexander's reasonable explanation for concealing his wealth, Olivia couldn't entirely silence growing concerns about other potential deceptions. The household staff operated with military precision and seemed oddly deferential, even for employees of the extremely wealthy. Certain electronic equipment throughout the home appeared more sophisticated than standard security systems. Alexander's business calls always occurred behind locked doors, and multiple areas of their home remained off-limits, explained away as sensitive business operations. His travel schedule included locations that seemed unusual for legitimate international business, remote regions with limited infrastructure, or countries known for regulatory flexibility. When questioned about these peculiarities, Alexander consistently provided plausible explanations involving corporate espionage concerns, competitor threats, or the complexities of global business. Each explanation seemed reasonable in isolation, yet collectively they formed a pattern that increasingly troubled Olivia's intuition. Subscribe now to discover the dark truth behind Alexander's fortune and witness Olivia's shocking discovery that will force her to question everything about her new husband. Will she uncover secrets that threaten not just her marriage, but potentially her safety? What happens when the fairy tale rescue becomes a gilded cage? Hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss the revelation that changes everything for this family, who thought they'd finally found security after devastating betrayal. Like this video if you've ever discovered someone wasn't exactly who they claimed to be, and comment below about whether you think Olivia should have questioned Alexander's modest lifestyle more thoroughly before marrying him. 3 months into their marriage, Alexander's behavioral quirks began coalescing into patterns too consistent to ignore. What initially appeared as the normal eccentricities of a wealthy businessman gradually revealed themselves as something more deliberate and concerning. Alexander maintained rigorous schedules for phone calls that couldn't be interrupted under any circumstances. He would check his watch periodically during family activities, excusing himself precisely regardless of the moment, even during Madison's birthday celebration when she was about to blow out her candles. His demeanor during these transitions shifted noticeably, his warm attentiveness replaced by cool efficiency seconds before disappearing into his office. More troubling was his reaction when Olivia once tried to deliver a message during one such call. His expression had transformed from annoyance to something harder before he quickly composed himself. "Never interrupt these particular calls," he later explained with unusual firmness. "The stakes are too high." The physical architecture of their home included increasingly obvious restrictions. Certain wings remained permanently off-limits to both Olivia and the children, guarded by electronic locks requiring credentials she didn't possess. Alexander's primary office suite occupied an entire section of the East Wing, with access controlled by both biometric scanners and armed security staff who maintained positions outside, regardless of whether Alexander was present. When Olivia questioned these measures, Alexander cited standard protocols for someone in his position, explaining that corporate intelligence was a multi-billion-dollar industry where competitors would exploit any vulnerability. A separate building on the property housed what Alexander called the Operations Center, a facility she glimpsed only once, when a door was briefly opened, revealing rows of monitors and communication equipment that resembled a military command post rather than a corporate headquarters. "Just infrastructure monitoring and global market tracking," Alexander explained, without inviting further inspection. Alexander's travel patterns defied conventional business logic. He would disappear for 48 hours to locations like Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, or Sudan, countries with limited infrastructure and volatile political situations. These trips often coincided with news reports of political unrest, major resource deals, or government transitions in those regions. When Olivia inquired about the nature of his business in such locations, his answers remained vague: establishing connections, exploring opportunities, or resolving situations. The security personnel who accompanied him on these journeys moved with the coordinated precision of military units rather than corporate bodyguards, communicating through encrypted channels and conducting systematic sweeps of vehicles and rooms before Alexander would enter them. The discovery occurred on a Tuesday afternoon when Alexander was traveling in Azerbaijan. Olivia had been searching for a missing earring, one of a pair Alexander had given her for their 1-month anniversary. Retracing her steps to his office which household staff had cleaned that morning, she received permission from his assistant to look around. While checking beneath a side table, Olivia noticed that the antique Persian rug was slightly askew, revealing a nearly invisible seam in the hardwood flooring. Curiosity prompted her to pull the rug back further, exposing a floor safe with a keypad. She would have ignored it had the safe not been partially open, perhaps carelessly left unlocked by Alexander or accessed by someone else who failed to secure it properly. The decision to look inside wasn't premeditated, but instant, driven by months of accumulated questions. Inside the safe lay a folder containing multiple passports with Alexander's photograph but different names: British, Canadian, Japanese, and Argentine identities, each with different birth dates and biographical details. Beside these lay USB drives, a collection of SIM cards, and documents in various languages. Most were unintelligible to Olivia, but she recognized Cyrillic text, Mandarin characters, and Arabic script. Some papers contained what appeared to be banking information for institutions in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Liechtenstein. More alarming was a collection of dossiers on various individuals, politicians, corporate executives, and government officials, containing detailed personal information, including family photographs, daily routines, and what appeared to be compromising documentation of private activities. A news article from an international financial publication caught Olivia's attention. It detailed the unexplained disappearance of Dr. Eleanor Webb, a research scientist who had threatened to expose illegal pharmaceutical testing practices at Meridian Biologics, a company Olivia recognized as part of Alexander's corporate portfolio. The article quoted anonymous sources expressing fear for Webb's safety after she had allegedly compiled evidence of unethical trials conducted in several developing nations. Handwritten notes in Alexander's distinctive script appeared in the margins, including a timeline of Webb's movements before her disappearance and a list of her known associates, each marked with either handled or monitoring annotation. Olivia's blood turned cold as she processed the implications of these clinical notations. The sound of the office door opening caused Olivia to look up, instinctively closing the folder. Alexander's assistant, Natalia, stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation as she assessed the situation. "You really don't know who you married, do you?" she asked, closing the door behind her and engaging the lock. Rather than calling security, as Olivia expected, Natalia sat in Alexander's chair and regarded her with something resembling pity. "I wondered how long it would take you to start finding pieces of the truth." For the next 20 minutes, Natalia outlined Alexander's actual business empire, more built partially on legitimate enterprises, but substantially supported by money laundering for political regimes, pharmaceutical price manipulation that caused thousands of deaths in developing countries through medication shortages, and systematic silencing of those who threatened his operations. "Alexander is not evil in the way you might imagine," Natalia explained with clinical detachment. "Alexander simply operates with different parameters of acceptable action. He doesn't enjoy hurting people. He just doesn't factor human cost into his equations when it conflicts with his objectives." She confirmed that Alexander's interest in Olivia had been genuine. "He truly loves you and the girls in his way, but his past contained shadows darker than Olivia could have imagined, including strategic relationships with intelligence agencies, organized crime figures, and corrupt government officials worldwide." What would you do if you discovered your partner's wealth, the very fortune providing your children's security after months of desperate struggle, came from sources that violated your most fundamental moral principles? Would you prioritize your family's safety and comfort, or your personal ethics? Could you live with knowledge of harm done to others that indirectly benefits your children? Would you confront your partner, knowing the potential danger, or strategically plan your next move in silence? This isn't just Olivia's dilemma. It represents the impossible choices many face when security and morality collide. Share in the comments what decision you would make if faced with this discovery. Confrontation with Alexander proved inevitable after Olivia's discovery. 3 days after Natalia's revelation, when Alexander returned from Azerbaijan, Olivia waited until the household settled into nighttime quiet before presenting the evidence she had gathered. The documents lay on the table between them in their private sitting room. Alexander's multiple identities and annotated articles, a silent testimony to his hidden activity. His initial reaction wasn't anger or denial, but a resigned acceptance, as though he had always anticipated this moment would arrive. His defense began not with dismissal, but with justification, a calm, methodical explanation of what he termed necessary business practices in an unforgiving global marketplace. There are no truly clean hands in building something of significant scale, Alexander explained, his voice steady as he outlined a worldview where ethical compromises were simply transactional costs. Every fortune, every empire, every comfortable life you see around you is built on decisions that would make the beneficiaries uncomfortable if examined too closely. The difference is that I'm honest with myself about it. He spoke of competitors eliminated, political alliances forged through mutual self-interest, and information leveraged to ensure favorable outcomes. Each example was presented not as wrongdoing, but as strategic necessity, the pragmatic choices of a man who understood how power actually functioned beneath civilization's polite veneer. "I gave you and your daughters everything Michael took away," Alexander reminded her, his tone softening as he reached for her hand, which she withdrew. Security, stability, education, opportunity, a future without constraint. Does how I built this life really matter more than what I've given you? He gestured toward the wing where the girls slept in rooms filled with everything they could desire. "Remember where you were when we met, Olivia. Remember the unpaid bills, the empty refrigerator, the constant fear. I erased those concerns forever." His argument carried the weight of observable truth. Her children were thriving, their futures secured through trusts he had established that would provide for them regardless of anything else. Would you rather they had principle or protection? Because the world rarely offers both. Olivia's moral architecture, constructed over a lifetime of believing in fundamental right and wrong, collided violently with her maternal instinct to protect her children's well-being. The philosophical dilemma took physical form as a tightness in her chest, making each breath a deliberate act. Could she justify remaining in a marriage, knowing her comfort derived from practices that harmed others? Could she reconcile the man who taught Madison to ride a bicycle with the one who methodically tracked a whistleblower who later vanished? The Alexander who read bedtime stories to Zoe was the same man whose marginal notations cataloged leverage points to control government officials. Each memory of kindness now required re-examination through this new, troubling lens. The realization that leaving might prove not merely difficult but dangerous emerged gradually as Olivia considered her options. Alexander hadn't threatened her. In fact, he had promised she could leave with the children and sufficient resources if that was her decision. But Natalia's warnings echoed in her thoughts. Alexander doesn't permit loose ends in his operations. While he loves you, he's also practical about risk management. The implication was clear. Knowledge of Alexander's activities represented a liability he would need to address. Even with the best intentions, could a man accustomed to neutralizing threats truly allow her to walk away with sensitive information? The invisible infrastructure of surveillance and security that had previously represented protection now felt like potential confinement. "I traded one form of vulnerability for another," Olivia whispered to herself that night, the irony of her situation becoming painfully clear. Michael's abandonment had left her financially exposed but free. Alexander's protection offered financial security, but at the cost of moral compromise and potential danger. The bitter truth emerged that vulnerability takes many forms, and escaping one variety often means encountering another. With Michael, the threat had been poverty and instability. With Alexander, it was complicity and constraint. She had not eliminated vulnerability from her life, but merely exchanged its manifestation, a realization both devastating and enlightening. The deeper philosophical questions transcended her immediate circumstances. At what point does security purchased at the expense of principle become a prison rather than protection? How many compromises can one make before losing the essential core of one's character? Is it possible to benefit from systems we find morally reprehensible without becoming corrupted by association? These weren't simply abstract considerations but urgent, practical questions demanding immediate answers. Each possible path forward, staying, leaving, confronting, accepting, carried consequences not just for her, but for 3 children who had already endured profound disruption and who had finally found stability, however questionably sourced. Standing in the doorway of the bedroom her daughters shared by choice, despite each having their own lavish space, Olivia watched their peaceful sleep. Madison's arm was flung protectively over Zoe, while Abigail slept with a book still clutched in her hand. Their faces, soft in repose, showed no trace of the anxiety that had marked them during the months of struggle after Michael's departure. They had adapted to luxury with the resilience of youth, accepting their transformed circumstances as simply their new reality. As Olivia contemplated the sleeping girls, the question crystallized not as what choice would allow her to maintain her moral principles, but what decision would ultimately protect these 3 innocent lives entrusted to her care, and whether those 2 objectives could possibly align. Olivia's journey from suburban mother to reluctant billionaire's wife illuminates universal truths about the bargains we strike in pursuit of security. Her story isn't simply about one woman's extraordinary circumstances, but about the incremental compromises that shape all our lives. We begin with clear boundaries, lines we swear never to cross, yet find these lines shifting when confronted with practical necessities, or the responsibility of protecting others who depend on us. The terrain between our idealized moral selves and our pragmatic choices often remains unexplored until crisis forces us to navigate it. Olivia's extreme situation magnifies this common human experience, revealing how quickly certainty can dissolve when abstract principles collide with concrete needs. The trade-offs between security and ethical compromise rarely present themselves as dramatic crossroads. Instead, they arrive as subtle negotiations, small concessions that accumulate until we find ourselves in territory we never intended to occupy. Olivia's transition from refusing Alexander's initial dinner invitation to contemplating complicity in his empire demonstrates how vulnerability can reshape our decision-making framework. Financial desperation created the conditions where Alexander's kindness appeared as salvation rather than strategy. The comfort he provided her children came packaged with moral costs not immediately visible, but eventually unavoidable. This pattern repeats throughout society, from individuals accepting employment with companies whose practices they question, to nations aligning with problematic regimes that offer economic advantages. The true price of such bargains often remains hidden until fully paid. Whatever Olivia ultimately decides, whether to remain with Alexander and influence his empire from within, to leave despite the risks, or to find some middle path between these extremes, her choice will teach her daughters implicit lessons about navigating a morally complex world. If she stays, she might demonstrate the pragmatic reality that sometimes we must work within flawed systems to effect change, that purity of principle can be a luxury afforded primarily to those without responsibilities for others. If she leaves, she might show them that personal integrity ultimately outweighs material comfort, that some prices are too high, regardless of benefits received. Neither lesson is simple. Neither path is perfect. Both contain truth her daughters will need to understand as they grow into a world where clear moral victories are rare and compromise is inevitable. What would you do in Olivia's position? Where do your own non-negotiable boundaries lie? How much would those boundaries shift if children depended on your decisions? Would you choose differently if leaving meant returning to financial insecurity but moral clarity? Or would you stay, using your position to gradually influence positive change from within a problematic system? These aren't hypothetical questions, but practical ones many face in less dramatic form. The executive who discovers questionable practices at her company while supporting family members who rely on her income. The parent who compromises personal dreams to provide stability for their children. The partner who remains in an unfulfilling relationship because the alternative seems worse. Vulnerability shapes our choices more profoundly than we often acknowledge. Our decisions in moments of greatest exposure reveal our true hierarchy of values more accurately than any stated principles. Olivia's story reminds us that judgment comes easily, only to those who have never faced impossible choices between competing goods. Like, share, and subscribe if this story made you think about the choices we make when we're vulnerable. How have you navigated your own impossible decisions between security and principle? What wisdom would you share with Olivia if you could speak with her directly? Join our community at Milton Stories, where we explore the complicated reality of human relationships and the lessons they teach us about ourselves.